Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, June 11th. Derek Van Riper, Saris, Jed Lowry here with you on this episode. We got some baseball news you should know. Lots of injuries getting worse around the league, but we do have the Athletics player poll. The annual anonymous player poll results are in. Some fun results, I think, as we looked through some of those earlier today. So we'll discuss that. We're going to dig into game planning for opposing pitchers. There was a great story that Will Salmon wrote about Pete Alonso and how Alonso has changed some of the things he is doing in game prep this year. We started asking questions like, what do we actually want to have at our disposal if we were in a position like that of Pete Alonso right now? So we're going to use Pete Alonso versus the Astros in an interleague series as a hypothetical breakdown. A lot of ground to cover today, guys. If you haven't joined our Discord already, you can do that with the link in the show description. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to smash that like button. I will continue to say smash the like button until the end of time. I don't care how much the kids laugh at me. That is what I am here for. All right, let's get to the news. Aaron Nola has a stress reaction in his rib cage. It could keep him sidelined until the All-Star break. Maybe an explanation for why Aaron Nola hasn't quite looked like himself, but it does leave the door open for Mick Abel to continue getting some run against big league hitters.
Yeah, I was hoping this would be the case, for the good news being like Mick Abel gets a chance. He's been really exciting, and it's been fun to watch him pitch. I'm not hoping for that for Aaron Nola. This is one of those lost seasons. It feels like it was an ankle, and then maybe he was compensating for that ankle and did something to his rib cage, but it's really hard sometimes, I think, to just come back. You think, oh, it's just this one injury, and you're like, okay, the ankle feels good enough to get out there, and then you're like, oh, wait, I did something. I guess the one way that I would refer to it is the pitchers refer to themselves as compensators, and that they're elite compensators, and that's a good thing in like how do you get through small things, but it can also lead to big things because you're like, oh, I'm doing this more because I did that, or that hurts, and so I'm doing this. And I think that's probably how we got to this moment for Aaron Nola.
I will. Sorry. Let me just add, because I think that's just true in general in baseball, not just pitchers, right? Like you got everyday guys doing the same thing. That you're going out there and trying to these small things that add up, and then something else gets hurt for overcompensation. So yeah, I think pitchers is probably because of the repetitive nature of the pitching motion, and that's truly the only thing that they're doing, right? Like on a regular basis. So it's probably more amplified, but I think, position players are in the same boat. And I would say baseball players in general are elite compensators.
Yeah, my old friend Bernie Pleskoff was a pro scout for a while, and he compared injuries that impact mechanics to the real life problem of getting a pebble in your shoe, right? You could walk around with a pebble in your shoe for a little while, but you're not going to walk the same way you walk without that pebble. And eventually something else starts to bother you. Maybe you're flexing your foot, so your calf starts to hurt, and then you're compensating and creating a problem with your other leg, right? So I think it's something along those lines where you can take one problem, and because of the kinetic chain and how the body works, you can quickly create another one. We'll see where things go with Abel, though. And I think the update on Andrew Painter was that they're still bringing him along slowly, anticipating bringing Andrew Painter to the fold more likely as a starter than as a reliever after the All-Star break. But this could be an absence for Nola that spans about that long. Jed, here's some injury news that came down on Tuesday. Matt Chapman went on the IL and will actually visit with a hand specialist in Los Angeles later this week. Every time I hear about a hand and a wrist injury right now, I start thinking of the Yordan Alvarez situation in Houston, where it might seem like a relatively minor problem, but it's one of those areas that can be a lot more complicated than people realize.
Yeah. And I just want to give a shout out to Mick Abel, local kid here to the Portland area, and had a chance to get to know him this last off season. So I'm really happy to, see the success that he's had, and, obviously continued opportunities and success, but Chappie, yeah, that you could see that on that dive back, something got jammed, something happened. And obviously when you're talking about a throwing throwing hand, with a guy who has, one of his greatest assets is on the defensive side. I mean, obviously he's having a great offensive year, but I mean, this guy is one of the best defensive third basemen I've seen in my life. So, he's a guy that without that throwing arm is still valuable, but you're also talking about the top hand of the bat that's going to generate a lot of power and direction. But
and
it's
he's
also
kind of a top hand hitter too.
Exactly, and it's also going to absorb all of the force from the ball. Right, like when you have that top hand. I remember when I came back from my torn UCL in my right thumb. My first at bat back was against Clayton Kershaw, and he's just pounding cutters in on me. And I mean that's it's a really hard injury. Hands, you realize very quickly in baseball how valuable and how you don't. People talk about a lot of other systems in the body, but the hands ultimately, allow you to do the things that you're trying to do in baseball.
Yeah, not a lot of depth in San Francisco either. I mean, you lose a guy like Chapman and Casey Schmidt, I think is a good defensive backup, but not going to bring anything close to the same offensive ceiling that Matt Chapman offers. I think that's one of the flaws of the build in San Francisco right now. When they have to lean on depth, it's more suspect kind of quad A type players right now that are in the mix, but an opportunity nonetheless for Schmidt.
I think the differences between surgery and non-surgery outcomes are going to be on the level of weeks and weeks. I mean, I think if it is surgery, you may be out 6 to 8. But if it is not surgery, then maybe it could be 2 to 4. I'm sort of guessing, but I'm not a hand specialist. But once you put surgery in there, there's all the recovery from the surgery and the rehab. So I doubt, there's no way that he's back in a month if there's a surgery involved.
Yeah, and then there's also the difference between there's a difference between being medically cleared to participate and feeling good. Exactly.
Oh man.
It also strikes me as another area where even if you avoid surgery, there's so many ways to aggravate the injuries in and around the hands and wrists. You get hit by another pitch, you foul something off, you dive back into a bag again, you slide into something. There's a lot of ways to create more discomfort with a problem like that. So that could be a longer term chronic problem all season, even if the outcome ends up being relatively positive with a Chapman return.
Yeah, Bomel's going to have some managing to do with that moving forward, regardless of surgical or non-surgical.
A couple of quick updates on players we discussed earlier in the week. Bryce Miller had a PRP injection, likely out 4 to 6 weeks. Yet again, Dr. Keith Meister getting a mention on the show. He checked Miller out, and for now, surgery will be avoided. We know he's dealing with a bone spur in his arm. That seems to be the root cause of the inflammation that Miller is dealing with. So opportunity for Logan Evans will be even longer than we realized when we announced that news earlier in the show on Tuesday. Got to follow up on Justin Martinez. The diagnosis of a sprained UCL has been confirmed. He's going to get a second opinion on the MRI, but that probably means the possibility of Tommy John surgery is looming over the Diamondbacks' young flame-throwing reliever. And as you suggested yesterday, it's probably going to bump Shelby Miller back into that closer role for Arizona.
And Shelby's a good story. I mean, he's throwing harder than he's thrown in a while, and he's even changed his mix. And I think he can be a good stand-in for Martinez. And if they can find another young fireballer to take his place, then maybe they can still recover the season. But it's going to be sad for Justin Martinez. Once you have a sprained UCL, I think there are some guys who have pitched through it. We famously talked about Masahiro Tanaka kind of pitching through it. But Tanaka threw like 91. And I just I don't know if I just doubt that a guy that throws 97 to 100 is going to come back out there with a sprained UCL.
Yeah, sprain is always always a funny term to me, because if you have a grade 3 sprain, it's a full tear of the ligament.
Sprain is a tear.
Like,
it's just a question of degree.
yeah, and so exactly, like everyone's like, oh, it's just a sprain, you're fine, it's not even torn. Like, no, that's literally the definition of a sprain. It's like stretched or torn ligament. So like it just depends on the grade of the strain or the sprain.
It's player poll week at The Athletic, so a few pieces dropped coming off of that. It's an anonymous player poll, and it always makes me wonder when I see a great quote from these polls, who actually said it. There was one player that wanted to make the season longer, and it was the quote. The quote was, "It might make my wife upset, but I think the season should be longer." And I'm like, what sicko? Who in the game wants the season to be longer? Who is such an animal out there that
That's
they're like,
the young
I want to
man.
play 200 games?
Oh my God.
So it's a young married player. Can we play a game of Guess Who here? Like, who would actually say that? Who would want to add to the 162 game season?
I don't know, man. I can't imagine it.
Somebody wanted more fights. Is there anybody that comes to mind when you saw that?
I'm guessing it was a position player who was on a hot streak. And they caught him at the right time, and he's like, "Man, if we played a 180, like feeling real good about himself."
Yeah, more fights. That was part of the some of the players saying like, remove all the rules that we've done. Let's go back to old school baseball. Let's like run people over at second base and at home again. And like, you watch those old highlights of like Pete Rose taking the guy out, and I think who's the guy at second that they always show? Is it like Harold Reynolds being taken out?
I think that's Albert Bell running into, is it Fernando Vina?
Oh yeah, that's a big one they showed too. But and there in the 70s there was a guy that just like would just fully take out people, just like almost like football tackle them at second base. And I don't know. I don't think we need to go back to that. I just feel like, our modern players are pushing their bodies to such an extent. They're such elite athletes that if we add this component to it, we're just adding more injury. It's that's all I see. It's like
I've never understood that. Like I get it from an entertainment, perspective, but that's what boxing and UFC are for. Like this is, the union always talks about like we're, collective, like we're one unit, right? Like it's better for the game too. And like injuries are just not good for the game ultimately, right? Like it's not good for the player, it's not good for the team. And so, I mean, I think player safety is something that is valuable, and we should be looking to continue to keep the big names and giving people as much opportunity to stay on the field as long as possible.
It's interesting.
So I'm gonna have to disagree with the more fights part.
Yeah, the more fights definitely seems to counteract the finding ways to keep people healthy. Fewer games. I mean, that seems like a thing that people would actually want. And I think the complications with that usually come back to gate revenue, TV revenue, all those deals that are already in place. It becomes tricky to do that. But someone suggested the 7-inning doubleheaders that were being played during the 2020 shortened COVID season as one way to maybe work around that. I mean, imagine if every Monday was off, like in the minor leagues, but on Sunday, before your off day, you played a 7-inning doubleheader, and it was just an extended baseball day for fans. It was the best day to go to the yard because you get 2 games.
There's a really obvious thing that we can do. Cut spring training, dude. I think we went to 154 game seasons, which we used to have in baseball. That's not like something that's never been done before. Go back to 154 and cut a week off of spring. Just a week off of spring, and you've got your days back already. I don't know what you have to give to the owners though, because some of those owners are really raking in the cash in the spring. I mean, they're not really paying the players. It's not really the way the players are played. They don't really get money for spring training. And then the Giants and the Cubs, do you know how much those tickets cost in the spring? It's like $100 for a seat in spring training, where you only get to see the starters for like 6 innings, 5 innings, before they're walking out into the clubhouse. So I don't know. I think that one, you just have to kind of appeal to the owner's best wishes for the sport. But you have to give them something. So maybe the 7-inning doubleheader is a way to be like, okay, we don't have to cut from 162 to 154 and like take away money out of your pocket.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be curious to know, how much, if there's any correlation between injury and 162 games versus 154. And if you could show that the owners are going to save X amount of money because you're not going to have
more
as
likely
much,
to keep.
Yeah. You're not going to have, yeah, exactly. You're not going to have as much money on the IL. Because there's replacement cost. I mean, if you're adding a guy to the 40-man, you're also adding him to Major League Insurance. Like there's all these other ripple effects that happen when a guy goes onto the IL, and if you have to add a guy to the 40-man, or so there's it's not as simple as black and white. There's a lot of drag-alongs that come with that. But I think from a starting point, I'd be interested to see if you could draw any conclusions from a shortened season to keeping guys off the IL and saving money that way.
Yeah, I think having that built-in rest day once a week would at least be a step in the right direction. If you got some nagging thing you've been playing through, maybe just one day off that isn't a game off, it's just a day off.
Yeah,
takes the pressure off your team because you're trying to win, gives you that chance. Yeah. If you're struggling with a slump mentally, it gives you a chance to reset, do something that sparks a little joy, spend some time with your family when you don't get a lot of that during the season. I think it could go a long way. I think it'd be good for people covering the game too, to have a built-in break every week.
Well, and furthermore, I think there's opportunity to engage with sponsors and, get more publicity for players. I mean, if you look at the NFL or the NBA, those players have far more opportunities to engage with corporate sponsors. And, it's really hard it's really hard to engage as a player when you do have an off day. They're so valuable. And they're so precious that the last thing you want to do is show up at a corporate sponsor event or go to a photo shoot or a video shoot on one of those precious few off days.
Yeah, one thing I've also noticed from people covering the game, I think this actually has slowed down a little bit because we are no longer sending writers on the road as much, and so they're not really doing the grind where they're on the road as much as a player and getting paid way poorer than a player. And so what I've seen from what I used to see a little bit more was a real level of cynicism from older writers. Just because you're like, I do this every day, every day I'm on a plane, I'm going somewhere, and the players don't respect me and the game, this and that, and they get really grumpy, and that comes through in their writing, and then you start getting like, think about some of these broadcasters we have that are broadcasting games and talking crap on baseball as they're broadcasting a game. I think some of that comes from just this heaviness that comes from, having to play every day and having to go through the grind. Like if you lift a little bit of that heaviness, maybe there's just a more positivity about the sport in general.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you're worried about the action stopping for a day, you could also just split it where AL teams are off on Monday, NL teams are off on Thursday, right? Lighter slates both days, but everyone's still getting a day off. There's still ways to do that and keep the powers that be all happy. But yeah, a lot to unpack.
I like the idea of a full stop for a day. I mean, they do it in Japan. It's, I think it can make you thirstier for like, hey, take your wife out. It's Tuesday. Like, go see your family. On Wednesday, you can turn the TV on again and start watching baseball. You know what I mean? I think that I would take Tuesdays off because Mondays are long weekends. One other thing I looked at a lot in this was the sort of appraisal of different organizations, and there's not really too many surprises in there. I mean, the bad ones are at the bottom and the good ones are at the top. Everyone wants to play for the Dodgers and Yankees, the Braves and Cubs up there. The Guardians being up there is kind of interesting because they don't have a lot of money, but I guess they make their players feel good, and they feel generally like this is a smart team that's going the right direction. So like even the Rays got like a bunch of votes for that's a place that they'd like to play. So it's not only about money, but it's a lot about money because at the bottom of the Angels, the Pirates, the Marlins, the Rockies, the White Sox, the A's, and the A's probably deserve most of or all of the smoke they got in this. I just found it interesting that like it's really obvious when you look at the A's, and then they were talking about the Marlins getting Subway sandwiches as the spread on the road sometimes, and so I think you do that enough, and the players talk, and they're like, "Oh, did you hear what they ate? Last week?" And like, they don't even get this, or they don't get that. It's a little bit akin to like in Moneyball, where like they've had to pay for their drinks out of the vending machine. Like if you do that too often, I think players will talk, and you get a really bad reputation. The Pirates, though, somebody said, the players get the resources. They said, but what is it here? The Pirates give players resources, but their owner just has zero interest in winning. So I thought that was interesting, is that you could still do right by your players on an individual basis and on giving them resources and giving what they need to win. But if a player just thinks you're not going to add, you're not going to give us anything. If we're good, you're not going to go trade for anybody. You're not going to, sign a free agent. I think that just leads a level of pessimism about the team that can kind of change your appraisal of the team as well.
I will defend the A's a little bit on this one, because I read one of the comments about the A's is like on the road they stay in, I think it was bad places. I didn't know if that was at the major league level, at the minor league level, but that was one thing I will say from the A's organization. The travel was always really good, and we stayed at really nice places. So, I think the, hats off for I'll give Mickey Morabito a shout out here for always, always finding the good hotels and then having the resources to stay, at the Four Seasons, the Ritz's. And so I will defend the A's on that front.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like the perception of an organization for people that have never been there is mostly secondhand, or it's what you might experience in the visiting clubhouse, right? If those facilities are average or worse, then you might have a negative feeling about that. But I do think the Pirates approach and the White Sox being so negatively viewed, like that's a pretty strong take on how the players feel about how those teams are run. And that traces usually back to ownership. I mean, the White Sox had the second worst reputation next to the A's. Like that's pretty surprising. Chicago, big city, generally a place people like to live. I was really surprised they were that far down. I also thought it was interesting. There's this cluster of teams, many of which play in the central divisions, not all, that don't really have a strong opinion from the players either way. They're just sort of there. They just exist.
Well, maybe they don't have as much player movement through those cities. I mean, that was one thing that was difficult about the manager one. They literally had a quote where he's like, bad one. I need to give you a bad one. I don't know, that guy in St. Louis. It's like, well, you never played for him, so you don't really know.
Exactly.
And like, how are you asking? You're asking players to be like, oh, I would never play for Mike Schilt. Well, you haven't. So how much do you know? You just know that he kind of chirps across the aisle at the umpire some, or you don't like you don't like the cut of his jib, like you don't like the way he looks. Like what is it? Why did Mike Schilt get all this crap in this poll? Why did Ollie Marmol? And I think it's all it's like vibes on some level. They don't really no idea what it means. I would say that the coaches that got the best votes, I would love to play for that guy, were all the chill, like even said, like Terry Francona's like a young grandpa, like the Bochy's up there. It's all the chill guys. And if we do have any
Vogt was on there too, right?
Yeah, Vogt is chill. I mean, he can be funny, and but he's chill. I think I mean, I have never played with anybody who wanted to win more, right. and I think that's the, like you say chill. I think it's the understanding that the game is hard. Right. And respecting that, that the outcome that you, that you expect isn't always going to happen, because the game is really hard. And so I think from a chill perspective, but I think, when it comes down to all those guys, he's still intense in terms of winning. And stuff.
I mean, the Tito and Vogt, to me, it's a recognition that the game is hard, but we're going to do everything we can to minimize mistakes and put ourselves in a position to win. And if we control that aspect, that you're satisfied, right? Because if you do the things that put you in a position to win and you don't win, you can accept that. But if you're doing things that are, you're beating yourself, that's, to me, the best managers I've played for are the ones that don't allow you to, don't allow you, or don't allow you to make the mistakes that allow you to beat yourself on a consistent basis.
Yeah. I just feel like also, like, it just seems very unlikely that anybody at the top of that list would throw a player under the bus to the media, Like, they'll defend, even if they do have a problem with the way the player did something, they'll defend them publicly and then maybe say something privately. But, a real sense of how to work with media, I think, is also something I see at the top.
Yeah, interesting that Vogt popped that high up on that list, though, already, as a guy that's in year 2 of his managerial career. But I think we had a feeling before he ever was a manager that Stephen Vogt was going to be in that role and do well with it.
Yeah, he was pretty obviously
No
a
doubt.
future manager.
No doubt.
I think the last thing I said to him when he walked out the door as a player was, I'll see you in a year or 2 as a manager.
And he just nodded and said, yeah, probably.
Yeah. But one of the pieces, and I didn't wade into the comments, and I'm not going to, but I can imagine it wouldn't be received that well, was the piece that was about, like, the sort of the lifestyle of being a player and the difficulties of it. And one of the things they pointed out was, like, we miss all the weddings. We miss a lot of all the vacations that we take in the summer, a lot of the family moments that happen in the summer. We're missing a lot of that while we're on the road. And we're not necessarily gaining a lifestyle that, like, people may have a different idea of what players' lifestyle is like on a day-to-day basis on the road. I think there's a lot of just, like, getting into the hotel late, eating DoorDash or eating something, like, not like fancy meals and, like, going out partying. Like, there are some players who still do that, but I think it's going away more and more. Like, what I've noticed is the more you, like, track your health, the more you have, like, an Aura ring on, the more you understand about rest and recovery, the more you're not going to go out, you're not going to do things. And in today's culture of, like, if you're like Mike Trout, or, like, if you're one of the top stars, like, you also, that's going to take energy if you go out and people recognize you and then you have to deal with it. Like, I'm finishing up The Crown, and it's like, they are so tired. Princess Di is so tired at the end because all she's doing is, like, running away from people taking pictures of her. And in this, like, give me an autograph, give me that sort of culture, like, it's got to be hard. You might be like, I'm just going to eat in, I'm just going to order in room service. And then you start to think, like, oh, that's not really the most crazy lifestyle. Yes, they get paid well, but then there's a lot of, like, what is it? Zooming with your children while you're eating, room service, and that's obviously they've made that decision to do that, but it's not something that we need to, we can give those people days off. That is a hard life. Maybe they could go, see what best dinner Seattle has to offer instead of just being in Seattle for, like, this amount of time and being gone,
Yeah, no, I don't think nobody's going to feel sorry for guys making millions of dollars, the ones that are those big stars. But there are younger guys not making as much money that are still living the same lifestyle. I was never the guy that went out and, I would get recognized occasionally, but when I would go out with the David Ortizes of the world, or, some of these guys, it shocked me, like, and I think a lot of that has to do with personality too, right? Like, do people drain you, or do people give you energy? Right. And I think guys, guys like David Ortiz, like he eats up
he
that
got
energy.
energy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of that has to do with personality. And so, but it is, I mean, you're on the road a lot, you're FaceTiming with your kids, just trying to get a couple minutes with them before they especially as they start going to school, just to get a couple minutes with them. So it's, that there are, I would describe them as sacrifices, that most people might not recognize and or really understand the implication of those sacrifices.
The pros are heavily reported on in the media at every transaction, right? Every signing, we know number of years, number of dollars. It's stuff that's just ingrained in the reporting. The cons list, which exists, comes out occasionally through things like this. So I do think it sheds interesting light on what it's actually like, because our perception doesn't completely align with the reality from the outside looking in. Let's build a game plan. I actually was having dreams last night about like being in this scenario, because we talked about it in our meeting on Monday. As I mentioned up top, Will Salmon wrote a story about Pete Alonso changing his game planning and how that impacted me as we started talking about the idea of breaking down the information that we would want to have at our disposal if we were going into a series. So we picked the Astros as just a random opponent because they've got a few starters that do different things. So we're going to talk about Framber Valdez and preparing for him versus Hunter Brown versus Colton Gordon, a guy that's kind of popped up recently to join this rotation. We'll look at a couple of the key relievers you'd likely see in a series with Josh Hader and Brian Abreu. And I think what I was doing was I was sort of like putting myself in the scenario dream-wise in real life of, oh no, like I'm actually the scenario was this. For some reason, and I didn't know why in my dream why this was happening, the Giants needed a body. They needed a person, and I was the only person they could get. And I didn't make it all the way to game time, but they had me at the stadium. They were getting me ready. They told me to take a nap, which I don't think is part of the usual pregame ritual in the clubhouse. And I think it was a little bit like the David Ayers situation in the NHL a few years ago. They had needed a goalie, and this happens every once in a while. The emergency goalie is someone that plays in beer league
on the down stands,
and they just can't get the goalie from the AHL to the NHL fast enough. So it's the person that maybe like drives a Zamboni part-time and has a regular job, and that person almost never has to play. I think that was the scenario that's going to unfold. I woke up before the game started, so I don't know what my role was or how it was going to play out. I was going to strike out looking. I don't think the bat was coming off my shoulder, to be completely honest. But pushing all that nonsense aside, the simple question to start was like, okay, so Pete Alonso gets more information from outside the organization to supplement the game planning the Mets do. That's something that's happening more and more around the league. I'm curious, Jed, like what would be missing from what the Mets have to offer? There's nothing wrong with this. It seems like a good thing. Pete's doing more homework, and you can kind of tell reading the story, the results are paying off. And even the way he's talking in meetings about preparing is different than it was previously. But what does a team not have that a player might want to go get and have at their disposal on their own?
Yeah, I mean that's there could be stuff that he's getting that is very tailored to him specifically, right? Where like the team is game planning from an entire organization perspective, and so and at the end of the day, if Pete Alonso or any player feels confident in the information that they're getting, that helps everybody. And so I think and I think a lot of it is based on your performance and where you are in your, in your career cycle. And at this point, Pete is a veteran guy. And he is, he is kind of taking charge clearly of his own career. And if this is what he feels comfortable with, it's kind of on him. Right. And I think that the organization, if they're getting the production out of him, Pete, keep doing your thing. Now, if there's a drop in production or they don't like the thing, the things that he's doing, there's probably a deeper conversation to be had. And I think this is why, an open line of communication and buy-in from both the player and the organization side is really important to make sure that there is an understanding between the two. But I like I said, from my perspective, if I'm looking at it, from an organization information, if I'm getting the production out of the guy and he feels confident in that information that he's getting, that he feels like is tailored to him, and he's being productive, keep doing your thing.
Yeah, that buy-in part is a key moment because, I was talking about this with a hitting coach being like, what about this outside hitting coach? And he's telling your guy something that you don't agree with. Like, what do you do about that? And he said, I just broadcast my values. And I asked them to have an open line of communication, like you said, to talk to me about what they're hearing. And you cannot tell them no outside knowledge. That is not the way to get buy-in. You can't say no outside coaching. No, you can't do that. You can't say my way or the highway. That does not work in today's game. What you say is, this is what I believe. This is why I believe it. Here are my values. Tell me about your values. And he said there was often a moment when they're struggling that if you broadcast your values enough and they're struggling, they might say, hey, what's that thing you've been talking about? Like I need a change. And so he said that there's always this sort of golden moment. From the analyst point of view, I do talk to analysts a lot, and they will, I don't know if there's that more than rolling their eyes till their eyes fall out of their head. Like they're like, our stuff is better than this stuff. Like they'll be like, we've looked at their stuff and our stuff is better. And yes, we would rather they used our stuff because our stuff is tailored to them. And we spent a lot of time on this and we think our stuff is better. That's why we made it. So like they privately will sort of roll their eyes, but to the players and as an organization, they'll say, whatever makes you feel comfortable, and higher up the food chain you go, AGMs will say whatever makes them feel comfortable. The analyst says, use my stuff. It's better.
I mean, if you're an analyst, you want people to use your stuff because it proves your value to the organization. If you're getting outside information and not using the reports generated by the analyst, that might make you feel like your job is not going to be valued, right? So I can understand that trepidation.
From a player standpoint, I don't think that, there's a certain level, sometimes maybe a mistrust of an organization. Sometimes it's like it's just like your values are to win the game. My values are for my career to get better. And these usually are in the right direction, but they don't always go in the exact same direction. And there's also just a value in sort of taking ownership of your own career. That's something Matt Liberatore said to me. You have to take ownership of your own career. And so, getting your own analysts, I know this is something that Garrett Cole has done. Like getting your own analysts, gives you a certain, maybe it can be just a foil. Oh, they're telling me this. Can you guys run the numbers and see what you guys think about this? And some of the biggest agencies, organizations like Boris Corp will have that probably for their biggest players. I don't know if they do that for all their players, but they will have some assets available to them to kind of crunch numbers for them. But you've seen these places. Vaulted, Dan Straley started a new place called Vaulted. There's also Codify. There's more and more like these kind of like your own R&D department, where they can crunch numbers for you and answer questions for you. And I think there's value in that. And I think, when I think of what Jed is talking about, like you could be in a meeting and be like, they're going to do this to righties. Okay. I'm Pete Alonso. Am I just a righty, or am I more than that? And so I try to think of it this way. I came up with this. This is Framber Valdez. This is what Framber throws to righties with 74 mile an hour plus bat speed, who swing with a 30 to 33 tilt like Alonso and have an attack angle that's not fully pull and not fully push, sort of a neutral attack angle. So other players like Pete Alonso, so not just all righties. And these players are like Julio Rodriguez, Seiya Suzuki. They have similar swing planes, similar bat speeds, similar approaches. And so you see against these players, I think the sinker one is probably the most different. Framber against these players will throw some high sinkers because these players generally are low ball hitters. If you've got 33-degree tilt, you got great bat speed, and you don't pull the ball like a ton, then you're letting the ball travel. I think you're comfortable hitting the low and away pitch. And that's where Alonso is best. That's Julio Rodriguez is pretty good at that. Seiya Suzuki is pretty good at that. So I think Framber, when he attacks Alonso, he's going to mix in some high sinkers and some low and in sinkers.
Yeah, and I so just like the idea of a sinker too. Like I know that Statcast records these things in certain ways, but like you're still talking about Framber's sinker at 2,200 RPM, right? Like this is we're not talking about. We're not talking about a guy who is throwing, he has the ability to throw one that has a lot of drop on it, but he's also got the feel to be able to throw it with more less sink up in the zone.
Two-seam. Yeah, it's more like
exactly. So it might come out of his hand with the pitch dynamics of a sinker, but he's not intentionally throwing a sinker up in the zone. He's trying to play with your eye level to set up the breaking ball.
Yeah, so I might, in that case, say to Alonso, like, I might show him this, and then if he was a lower information person, I might be like, see it up.
Mm-hmm.
Like see it up, because he's going to try. If you saw those, he's going to try everything under the hitting zone. He's going to try and get those low hitters to swing at changeups and curveballs that are under the strike zone. And so if you can just see it up, then that's a simple way to kind of coalesce this information. But if he wants to see the maps, you could say something more nuanced, like call, like you were just saying, Jed, like I might say to Pete Alonso, call the high 2-seamer or 4-seamer in your head. Just be like, I'm looking for the 4S up. I don't care what this says. Oh, they say you only throw sinkers. I don't like, it's a 4S up and a 2S down, and like, think of it that way. And you might put the right swing on the right ball at the right time.
Yeah, and I mean, if you kind of break it down, he that's really what Framber is, right? Like he's 80% sinker curve, right, or fastball curveball, and you're talking about a curveball that is elite. You're talking 5 inches more break, 5.5 inches more drop than the average left-handed curveball. And you're talking nearly 3,000 spin, 2959 with a 46.8% whiff. I mean, he is trying to set you up to chase the breaking ball down out of the zone. And, with the sinker down and away, the fastball, I mean, that is, he is going to guys that he respects. He is going to throw the 4-seamer up in the zone or the more straight one just to try to get you off, like to play with your eye level for the breaking ball. But for the most part, he's just throwing the sinker and it's going to, down and away, and the curveball down and in, right? And he's just, that's why the ground ball rate is as high as it is. Because if he executes those 2 pitches against an average major league hitter, he's getting outs or he's getting swings and misses.
Yeah, I think one thing that kind of stands out to me looking at the usage patterns from Framber Valdez is just how heavily he can lean on that curve once he gets ahead. I mean, especially against righties, looking back just these last 2 seasons, when he's ahead against a righty, 45% of the time he's throwing a curveball. 2 strikes, he's throwing it 54% of the time. So I think there's some guys and some pitches that are so good and so effective they can almost have a more predictable tendency and still get away with it. So Framber might actually fit into a bucket like that. Like ordinarily, certain usage thresholds, and that becomes problematic. But look at the body of work.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do, like I said, the actual pitch dynamics, right? Like it is, one of the best breaking balls in the league. So yes, he can get away with a lot more, but still, like, I think it's, I just remember an at bat, late in my career, Jesse Chavez, right? Sinker slider. I think he was 2% changeup. I had an at bat against him where he threw me 5 straight changeups. Right. So this is where, you go into it and like, you're the operator, right? Like you're the guy flying the plane, and, you have to navigate through, to use to use a Star Wars analogy, right? Like you're Han Solo, like when you're the player, you're Han Solo, and you got C-3PO standing behind you, telling you that you got a 1 in 3,000 whatever chance of flying through this asteroid field. I'll go back to this, right? It's like, you have to believe, like you have to have your plan and be able to execute it as the pilot, right? And so the information is valuable, but in the moment, if you are over analyzing this, unless you are just fully committed to one particular pitch, and that's somehow some guys hit. And I'm not trying to, say that's the wrong way to hit. I came from a different school of thinking where I was a different thinking around hitting, where I was far more reactionary, and I was trusting my eyes and the work that I put in prior to stepping into the box so I could be reactionary in the moment.
It sounds like there's a lot of information you want pre-game, maybe even pre-series, that you kind of consume that and then work with that. But then in-game, what you're looking at, were you video in-game before plate appearances? Do you find video to be helpful in any instances like that?
Well, the videos back in my day, right? Like, and still to this day, it's from center field. And the center field camera to me is very, very deceiving, because when you're standing on the side of the plate and you're watching from behind center field, first of all, you don't really know where that angle is, and it changes. It's not uniform across the league. And so being able to understand the depth of a pitch or the lateral movement or release point, it's not, I ended up not relying on the video. I would have relied much more on the StatCast information that we have now that really didn't exist when I was playing, because that actually shows you real movement. And I also think the Traject systems now are game changers. I mean, they're really, before Traject, I really don't think the analytics favored hitters much at all. I think the Traject machine, where they can actually reproduce the actual movement profile of pitches, has been the most positive analytical development on the hitting side, because you can go down. They're warming up a reliever, right? Kenley Jansen is down in the bullpen and he's ready to pitch. You can go see Kenley Jansen's pitch profile before you step in the box against him.
Yeah, and in this case, Pete Alonso, if he's like, ooh, well, he might actually try to back foot this. He might try to throw the sinker in and the curveball in, and like, I want to see how those two play off each other. Just give me that sequence over and over again. So I can I can maybe spot which one's the sinker, because the sinker is going to stay higher and maybe be a strike, and the curve is it's going to be below the zone. So I want to, you need to play off that.
Yeah, you're trying to find that release point, right? Like the release point, because like to your point of like seeing Framber up, right? Like I need to know where that release point is, where it's going to be a strike.
Yeah,
and where it's going to be a ball.
Guys, he doesn't have good command. He doesn't have great command. That's his weakness. So I think you generally would want to tell him, be patient and look for what you think are actually strikes, and you could maybe do some work down the cage that's like trying to discern between just where his strike zone is, what release angles are giving you strikes.
Well, and that's what makes it hard about a guy like this that has the spin that he does, and the amount of depth and break that his breaking ball does. It's really hard to, recognize that pitch and see if it's going to be a strike or not. I mean, that's why he's effective and why, he gets a lot of swings and misses.
From my experience analytically, this is what is so great about high spin curveballs. If you look at Lugo's, it's like it looks straight. It looks straight and then goes down, as opposed to anything that kind of goes up and down. You're getting the movement off of arc. You're kind of casting it. But the real sizzling curveballs are the ones that the highest spin ones actually look kind of straight and then just disappear. How much do you want to know about tendencies? So I was looking at Colton Gordon, and they have this chart, and they highlight in red anything that's really sort of over league average. But knowing that he uses the curve 28% of the time on first pitch is something I might be like, well, he doesn't go fastball all the time on first pitch. That's something I'd like to know. But just a lot of the other stuff, I'm not sure how much it's helpful. Although when the batter's ahead on righties, Colton Gordon goes to the four seam 63% of the time. I think I would circle things that start with a 6. If I'm looking through here, anything that's like maybe close to 2/3 of the time he does it, that's to me an opportunity to take a chance as a hitter. Now, it might be one of the 1/3 of the times when he does the other stuff, But 2/3 of the time, I'm guessing right. If I guess 4-seam on a 2-0 count, like I'd want to know that. So I think that would be useful. But if you're being reactive in the box, does that stuff go away, or do you keep a couple things in your head where like, yeah, he does have a tendency to go to the fastball in these counts?
Yeah. So I obviously looking at it from a little bit different perspective. I mean, there's a guy with a 27-degree arm angle, right? Relatively flat, kind of out, like slinging the ball. So it's a lot more lateral movement as opposed to the vertical movement. And this is not a guy who's going to overpower you. And I think that what he's relying on that 63% is the batter is ahead, and he's relying on them getting overly aggressive and getting themselves out, right? So he's looking to put that fastball in a spot that just entices you enough to take a big swing to get yourself out.
That's not a middle fastball. That's a
I mean, and that's the thing is like if he makes a mistake, right? And like that was my that was my note on him, is like, this is a guy that you're gonna walk up there, you're not gonna be you're not gonna be blown away by his stuff, but he's gonna find a way to get you to chase, right? And like that, or I should say, to get you to take a big swing out of your zone. And listen, the guy is in the 72nd percentile for chase, right? So he's getting guys to chase his fastball because they're looking at him and they're like, this guy's not going to beat me, so I'm going to take a bigger swing, right?
That's another way that they can use the tendencies against you. Either he can throw something that's not a fastball and surprise, or he can be like, oh, I gave what you wanted. You circled this. I gave you what you wanted, and you're going to take a huge swing. And oh, look, it wasn't really even a strike, or it was not really a pitch you wanted.
Yeah, and these are these guys, you go up there and if you try to do too much against a Colton Gordon, where you're like, oh, this guy's got nothing, you're gonna get yourself out more often than not off a guy like that. Like you're to me, I think you're looking for him to make a mistake, because he's not gonna walk you, right? I mean, you're talking about a guy that's in the 99th percentile for walk rate, so he's not gonna walk you. And he's also not going to overpower you. So I think the biggest thing with him is you just can't chase, because when he gives up when he makes a mistake, it's going to get hit hard, and you just can't chase out of the zone, because that's that's where he is going to get guys out, is that they are going to try to hit the 500-foot home run against him and get themselves out.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because that profile lends itself to being the low walk rate, high home run rate sort of profile. Like that, to me, seems like that would be a common thread throughout Colton Gordon's career. Like, you could have a 10+ year big league career, but I bet the 5 to 6% walk rates a lot with above average home run rates, because he's using that fastball that way, because he will make some mistakes with it, because guys can hit even non-mistake fastballs at that level for home runs. I think that's part of what you're going to get from him.
Right.
I think, I was also trying to use this like batters like thing for Hunter Brown. I think you get to actually see the real value of having two really good fastballs, because this is how Hunter Brown attacks people like Pete Alonso. And I think one thing you see is he's not throwing in the lower half of the zone. So he's not giving them a fastball where they want it. They want the lower half. And so, and even in the top half, what he's doing is he's throwing the 4-seam and the 2-seam, basically the top black, and the 4-seam's going up above it, and the 2-seam's like fading for a called strike, right? I think, or even a swing strike, because it's in on the hands. So that's pretty deadly. If you're a hitter, you probably prefer one of those two pitches. You either have a swing that's a little bit better for 2-seamers or a little better for 4-seamers. And I bet with tilt like Alonso, he's, it's a little bit more in line for 2-seamers. So you're hoping it's the 2-seamer, except it's still a high 2-seamer. It's not exactly where you want it. I think this is a pretty deadly combination. I mean, what would you do, Jed, if you stepped in the box against a guy who had two really good fastballs and he could do this with it? I mean,
this guy, 56-degree arm angle, right? Pretty much straight over the top. Classic, top of the zone fastball, 12-6 breaking ball, right? You're talking about a guy who has 6 inches more drop on his curveball than average, and 1.5 inches more rise than, on his fastball. And so, I look at that, like, and then the 2-seamer in particular, I think that the 2-seamer really just keeps hitters honest, just for that click, right? Because if you go up there and it's a 4-seamer only up in the zone and a breaking ball, it just, you can eliminate, certain release points, right? Because if the fastball starts, if the fastball starts 2 up, then, you can basically, if you're looking for a fastball and it starts 2 up, you can give up on it, right? You're like, okay, this is a ball. But if you just know he's got that sinker and it has any sort of depth to it, you gotta just stay
throw
in
over
there
them high release point, and it could come
and it come down for a strike. Exactly right. And so it's the sinker to me for Hunter Brown is just a way to keep guys honest on the 4-seamer up in the zone and setting guys up for really what is, the breaking ball is his pitch. And so I think that this is a guy, I look at the slider and the cutter as virtually the same pitch. I think it'll probably vary in movement and velo depending on the execution of it, but I don't view him as a cutter and slider guy. And then I look at the changeup too. Like he's got a pretty deep mix of pitches for a guy that has such an effective fastball and curveball. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, if you look at the changeup, it is a little bit more of a show pitch right now, but it's been effective for almost the same reason that the sinker has been effective. It produces some weak contact. The batting average is relatively low against the changeup. And so, it's just another thing to put in the back of the hitter's mind that they can't then cheat to the fastball up in the zone. And that's a really deadly combination when you've got a guy who can really ride that fastball up in the zone and then have that big 12-6 breaking ball. Because, if those are coming out of that same, tunnel, that they're really hard, especially with the spin that he does put on his breaking ball. It is really hard to differentiate the two. And, what
would you tell Pete Alonso in this situation?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I think it's situational dependent, but I think that, I'm aggressive early on a guy like this because it gets significantly harder, to have this at bat and be able to cover both of those pitches as you get deeper in the at bat. And so
you want to swing when he wants a strike still.
Exactly.
So I'm coming in the box.
Exactly. Like I'm and maybe that's, I am hunting a heater right here and just committing to the heater in the zone early. And then, if he gets ahead with the breaking ball, like you tip your cap to him. But I'm aggressive early off a guy versus a Colton Gordon where I know he's not going to blow me away with his stuff. I'm waiting him out. Right. I'm going to be a little bit more picky with what I'm looking for versus if I get something against Hunter Brown that like is close, especially heater, I want to be aggressive.
Yeah. If we look back at the box real quickly, just for Hunter Brown, he's not throwing the 4-seam in the zone.
Yep.
Barely. It's the 2-seam that he uses to be in the zone. So the more he needs to be in the zone, the more you have count leverage, or the earlier in the thing, I would assume it's a 2-seamer. So you could almost, I don't know, maybe he's more of a guess guy, more of an anticipation guy than you. I would say, early anticipate that it's a 2-seam. If he switches to the 4-seam and gets you swing strike early, then then he won. But if he needs a strike, it's probably going to be the 2-seamer. So just kind of assume in the counts where he needs a strike, it's more likely to be the 2-seamer and proceed accordingly.
Let's talk about the relievers briefly. I know we're running short on time, but the two you'd likely see in a 3-game series at some point, Brian Abreu and Josh Hader. I mean, both heavily 2-pitch guys, kind of common for relievers to be that way. Hader's had the unusual fastball really his whole career. And is it as simple when you see a heat map? If you look at something like Hader's location maps, do you start to have that same kind of, if it's up, it's a fastball, if it's down, it's a slider? Like, can you find anything in the release points? Like, what clues are you getting for a guy that has struck out more than 40% of the batters he's faced as a big leaguer? He's one of the best relievers we've seen really ever, despite a few occasional meltdowns in the postseason. Like, he seems like an incredibly difficult reliever to prepare for, even with his tendencies.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a couple things down. There's a reason he's an elite closer, right? And then the last thing I'll start with it, but the last thing I wrote down is good luck, because like this guy, you know, and I also think it's interesting that Statcast also refers to his fastball as a sinker. It must just be arm slot, because this is a guy like, you know, you're talking about 11.7% vertical drop with 2,300 spin on his quote unquote sinker. And versus Hunter Brown's four seamers, that's 11.9% vertical drop with 2,200 spin. So that's an elite four seamer that is virtually like Hader's actually spinning his quote unquote sinker faster than Hunter Brown's four seamer, and virtually has the same vertical drop. So I think
crazy.
that,
it's a sinker grip is why.
Yeah. And I mean, but you know, yeah,
it doesn't. It is a four seamer.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and that's what makes it unique, right? Because you know, I when I started looking at the Savant page, it was saying if you were to just say, hey, this guy's actually got a terrible sinker. It's 11 inches less drop than average and 6.3 less tail than the average sinker. So you'd be like, man, this guy's sinker stinks, you know, like if you didn't know who the guy was or the statistics were, you'd be like, this guy's not going to be effective at all with this sinker. Like it doesn't play. But so, you know, it's not a sinker, but he's also got, 2,500 spin on the slider with a 53% whiff rate. And I think a lot of it, there's some funk in the motion. There's a low release point with good extension. And so I think it's, you're talking about a guy and he throws strikes. He can beat you in the zone, and that's what makes him an elite closer. So you're talking about a funky motion with a low release point with, extra stuff.
Yeah, I bet you if you mapped release points in a 3D way, right? So you had the extension, along with, their height, and that he would have a very much an outlier, like that kind of extension on that low, like, so if you saw the sort of cloud of release points, there'd be Hader over here that's like in your face and low, and it's just like, just not something you get used to. I wonder if there's any value in sort of just renaming his pitches in your head and being like, this is a four seam cutter guy, and I'm just going to think about it that way. I know that I heard one opposing coach say that they were having a hard time facing Joey Lucchesi because he had this thing called the churve, and it had a weird movement or whatever. And one of the hitting coaches said, just think of it as a crappy curveball. And they were all like, okay. And then they all hit it. So sometimes you have to sort of rename the pitch in your head to get a different expectation. I was sort of talking about that with Alonso, and just think of Framber's high pitch as a four seam, just to like put that in your head that way,
And this is where, some of the disconnect happens between, analysts and players, is like, the analyst is saying sinker, and you go up there and you're like, that's not a sinker. And
right.
So,
and then you start to distrust what the analyst even says generally.
Exactly.
And they're just like, well, this is classified as a sinker. Do I need to explain all that to,
Right. Which is why, like, which is why the operator is really, the more valuable opinion in this, right? Cause ultimately they're the ones that have to execute on it. Right. Like the analyst obviously is providing a very valuable information, but the operator has to be the one, the hitter has to be the one that is, that opinion, especially the guys that have a track record. There's certain guys in the lineup, as you communicate in the dugout, that you're like, that you can trust, right? Like if he comes back and tells me that the pitch is moving this way or that way, I can trust that. There's other guys, you come back and he's saying one thing or other, like, yeah, I'm just going to brush that one off.
Mm-hmm. How about Brian Abreu on the way out? I noticed one thing about his slider, the stuff number on it has come down. It's not as dominant as it has been, but the results are still really good. So same kind of question that we had with Hader. Like, what do you do to give yourself a chance against the guy that's been one of the most dominant relievers in the league, really, for the last 3+ years now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this guy, with closer stuff, but ultimately just walks, way too many guys. You're talking about a guy that whiff percentile 98, K rate 90, but then you start going, chase rate is only 51, walk rate is in the 6th percentile. And then, you start looking at sliders. I mean, I know you said talking about the slider, the spin rate is down a little bit from 29.14 to 28.88, year over year. But I mean, this guy has incredible stuff. And, I guess similarly to like a Hunter Brown, or I'm being aggressive in the zone with a fastball early, and then I'm probably getting a little bit more patient as the at bat goes because he's got a propensity to walk guys, and so I think that if you get that fastball in the zone, depending on the situation, if you're down by 3 and he's in and you're leading off, might not be the best situation to go up there and hack at first pitch fastball. I mean, you might hit a homer, but the odds of that are not good. And what does it really do for the team? But I think with the stuff that he has, I'd be aggressive early and then, probably shrink my zone as the at bat went. Cause he's going to walk you.
Probably going to throw you some sliders if he gets ahead. It's like 63% usage with 2 strikes, 57% if he's ahead in the count too. So you're right to be looking for that fastball early from Brian Abreu. But hopefully that's insightful overall in terms of types of things that might be part of those reports that Pete Alonso is getting, or part of the reports that hitters want as they try to prepare for high leverage relievers and starters that they might see over the course of a series. As I mentioned earlier, you can jump into our Discord at the link in the show description. You can find Eno on Bluesky, Saris.bsky.social. Jed's over on Instagram, just Jed Lowry. I'm on Bluesky, bbr.bsky.social. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. We are back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.